Welcome back into the Daily Dose. I'm Jeff Hansen. The show is brought to you by Give'emHellBrigham.com and by CougarSportsInsider.com, part of the 24/7 Sports Network. Appreciate you guys tuning in, starting a new week with us here at the Daily Dose. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. Please fuel the algorithm. Like, comment, share, talk about, whatever you want to do. All of those things help fuel the algorithm, help us grow the platform here at the Daily Dose. First and foremost, I was wrong. It's not the first time I've been wrong, and it certainly isn't going to be the last time I was wrong, but I was wrong about this Kansas team. I thought, hey, they're putting up a ton of numbers statistically, but they haven't really been tested by a solid defense yet. Maybe we're anointing them too quick. No, I mean, that offense, maybe they're not going to score 50 points a game every single week, against every team they play the rest of the Big 12 season. But that offense is unique. They execute incredibly well. That offense is legitimate. Andy Kotelnicki is fantastic. Jalen Daniels is fantastic. As long as they have that rushing attack, Kansas is going to be very good. I was also wrong about the defense. I thought that, hey, maybe this defense is still closer to last year than this turned around team that we've seen so far from Kansas this year. No, they're a lot closer. I still don't think they're as elite as that offense is. I think they're going to give up some points as the year goes on. But that team plays hard. That defense plays physical. And they played physical against BYU from the Cougars' opening drive when they laid that hit on Parker Kingston to force the fumble that ultimately led to a touchdown. That Kansas defense was impressive. They are a physical team. Sometimes you got to tip your cap. You get beat by a team who's better than you. That's what happened on Saturday. So, yeah, I was wrong. I was optimistic. I thought BYU would come in. And in the first half, I was feeling pretty good about my optimism. But ultimately, Kansas made some adjustments at halftime, and they got the best of the Cougars. A lot of things went wrong for BYU in that game. And I want to go through some of those things, 4 or 5 of them, and try to identify, is this a BYU problem or is this Kansas caused this problem and you tip your cap to Kansas? Because ultimately, it was like BYU with Arkansas. Yeah, Arkansas's offensive line had a lot of holding penalties, but there was a defensive line from BYU that was overpowering them every time the ball was snapped, forcing them to hold. So sometimes you have to figure out, like, okay, is this a problem that BYU is they've got big issues and they're going to struggle against everybody? Or is it a problem that, hey, Kansas is a whole lot better than we thought they were? Maybe BYU just got beat by a better team. So the first thing that everybody's going to talk about, BYU gained 9 total rushing yards. 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 9. 9 rushing yards. That's not good. And while we have to give credit to the Kansas defense for ultimately doing what they were supposed to do against a bad rushing offense, this is a BYU problem. There's no question about this. This is the 4th straight game that BYU has had little to no rushing attack whatsoever. We thought that maybe after Arkansas, they found some flashes that, hey, BYU was never going to be a 200 yards per game type rushing offense. But they had shown enough against Arkansas, physical defense on the road, SEC country, blah, blah, blah. Maybe they've showed enough that this rushing attack can at least be a threat. Nope, it was not a threat. Kansas did not take the BYU running game seriously at all, especially in the second half. Keaton Slovis, that's when he started getting into trouble because he was throwing against a defense. They were jumping every route. They were sending blitzes on every play. They were not respecting the BYU rushing game even a little bit. So this is definitely a BYU problem. And how do you fix it? It's going to be really tough to fix. Everybody's going to look at Darryl Funk, the offensive line coach, and yeah, maybe there's a problem there. Maybe there needs to be a change. But I want to hold off on firing Darryl Funk for this reason and this reason only. There's nobody on staff that's going to step in and immediately improve the offensive line. You're not going to be able to hire an offensive line coach mid-year who's going to come in and immediately make a change that you notice, fire Darryl Funk today, that you hire somebody and see a tangible, better improvement by Friday when BYU kicks off against Cincinnati. Firing Darryl Funk right now makes no sense. 0 sense. Because there's no solution. You can go in and you can fire a guy, but if you don't have a plan on how to replace him and how to get better, doesn't help. It just doesn't help. Firing a coach, that's a postseason solution. That's not a midseason solution. Midseason solution, these players have got to find it. They got to find, I don't know if it's some attitude. I don't know if they got to hit the film room more. I don't know if practices aren't good. I don't know what it is, but it's going to have to come from the players. There's just no question about it because Firing a coach is not an option right now. This isn't a coordinator. This isn't firing a coordinator and you plug in the wide receiver coach or the run game coordinator or even the associate head coach or somebody else who knows the scheme and steps up. There's one guy who coaches the offensive line, and there's some GAs, Braden Kersley, sure. But Daryl Funk is the offensive line coach. You fire Daryl Funk, there's not an offensive line coach. Aaron Roderick's not an offensive line coach. Bessie Satake is not an offensive line coach. Harvey Young is not an offensive line coach. Daryl Funk's the offensive line coach. That's all you got. So you got to roll with Daryl Funk, and you got to find it within these players to get better. Next problem I want to talk about, the turnover game. BYU got crushed in the turnover game for the first time this year. 2 interceptions, a fumble. BYU lost the turnover game, and ultimately that led on the scoreboard, that led to BYU's demise. Take away those turnovers. Does BYU win? I don't know. Kansas still outplayed BYU, especially in the second half, but it's closer. I mean, you can't deny that those turnovers played a big role. So maybe BYU sneaks out a win, but they got hammered in the turnover game. So is that a BYU problem now? I don't think so. BYU's done really well protecting the football this year. This was a Kansas thing. Kansas forced those turnovers. They did a great job on all of them, really, with the exception of that last interception where it looked like Slovis and Chase Roberts were just on 2 different pages. Really, I mean, they forced the fumble, the pick six. They forced Keaton Slovis out of the pocket. They forced him to make a bad throw into traffic. Yeah, I'm giving all the credit to Kansas on that one. Obviously, BYU's got to adjust. Can't turn the ball over no matter how good the defense is playing. But I think this one is more of Kansas got the best of BYU on Saturday. I don't think that BYU is going to suddenly turn into this turnover-prone team that can't protect the football. Tip your cap to the Kansas Jayhawks on that one. The next problem I want to talk about, BYU could not stop the Kansas rushing attack, especially in the second half. For the game, the three-headed monster that Kansas was running with of Jalen Daniels at quarterback, Devin Neal, and Daniel Highshaw at running back, they got the best of BYU. BYU couldn't stop it. Seemingly every play, they were getting 5, 6, 7 yards a pop. For the game, they averaged 6 yards a carry on the ground. BYU had no answer. Is this a BYU problem? Yeah, BYU needs to fix it, but that was a really good Kansas rushing offense. Most offenses aren't going to be able to rush the ball as efficiently and as effectively as the Kansas Jayhawks do. They're one of the best and most well-executed offensive schemes in the entire country. You tip your cap. However, there's an asterisk there. We're going to watch this run defense a little bit more closely because going in, I think what Kansas did is they showcased, they highlighted the fractures in BYU's defense. They gave everybody else the blueprint of how to exploit some of the weaknesses that maybe hadn't shown up yet on film. So yeah, BYU is going to have to address this. This could be a BYU problem next week or a couple of weeks down the road. But right now, I'm willing to say BYU played an elite Kansas rushing offense. They're going to be better when they play teams who don't have that elite level of rushing offense. But there are some injuries. Ben Bywater went off the field. He could be gone for a long time. Nobody, Kalani's not going to say anything. But that injury looks serious. There's some injuries out there that BYU has to worry about right now, and that could play a big role in how they defend the run going forward. But for right now, it's a Kansas caused that problem on Saturday, but I'm going to watch this a little bit more closely as I go forward. Number 4, and we've seen this now 4 weeks in a row, just mental mistakes, whether it's illegal touching. We talked about the Roberts and Slovis interception where those two were just on 2 different pages. That's not great. BYU ran a screenplay late in the second half, and somehow Keelan Marion and LJ Martin were both the intended receivers. They were standing in the right spot. We saw Camden Garrett and Eddie Heckard. They got confused. They lost a wide receiver behind them for a touchdown. There were a lot of mental mistakes. And when we talk about mental mistakes, is that caused by an aggressive Kansas offense? Sure. Is that caused by a Kansas defense that was giving BYU's offense absolute hell because they could not control the running game? Yeah. I mean, that played a role. But after 4 weeks, getting plays in, BYU had to take a timeout out of a timeout again. Another illegal touching. No, this is a BYU problem, and it's a big problem, and it's becoming a bigger problem each week that it's still a problem. The coaches have got to get this figured out. Nothing's changed so far, and I don't know, I'm not smart enough to say what should change, but something clearly needs to change because it's not working. whether it's the play calls coming from Aaron Roderick to Fesi Sitake and into Keaton, something's not working. Something has to change. You can't be that slow. You can't do this again. There's a lot of problems. Guys that are still running routes into the wrong spots, and you're having 2 wide receivers both try to make catches on a ball. Something's wrong. The defense, we should have expected, and we did expect some mental mistakes. It's a brand new defensive scheme. But from Cam Garrett and Eddie Heckard, who have been playing in this scheme, those aren't the guys you expect to see those kinds of mistakes from. So, yeah, I mean, there's some big problems there. Did Kansas cause that? Yeah, BYU was down. BYU was flustered. But no, that's a BYU problem, and BYU absolutely has to fix it. And now my last thing I want to talk about, we really kind of already did with Daryl Funk on the offensive line, but let's circle back to some of the miscues that we've seen along the offensive line. And now with injuries, Kingsley Suamataia, he missed a lot of time in that game against Kansas. Waylon Lapuaho, maybe he has an extended serious injury. He missed a lot of time against Kansas. Braden Keim got the start, but ultimately had to move to left tackle. Caleb Etienne came in and played. Ian Fitzgerald got some reps. There's a mess at the offensive line position right now, and Daryl Funk has to figure it out. He has to. Like I said, we're not firing Daryl Funk. You, me, nobody. We can't. BYU, Kalani, nobody's firing Daryl Funk. That can't happen right now. That's not a solution. It's a non-starter today. Maybe that's the very first thing you do after week 12. Once the season is over, maybe that's the first decision that Kalani Sitake makes. Fine. At this point, I don't think Daryl Funk deserved to be fired last year. I think up to this point, he's been a solid offensive line coach. Under his tenure, I mean, these are just facts, right? BYU had their single season rushing record of all time when Tyler Algier. A couple of guys have gone to the NFL. I mean, the offensive line has been good. Maybe not spectacular, but they've been good. But this year, Daryl Funk has lost control of his offensive line unit. Because you look at the returning starts, you look at the talent, the recruiting stars, you look at the scheme, you look that has worked so far. I mean, everything points to this offensive line. They should be pretty darn good. Those aren't lies. We're not making those things up. I mean, that's just what the data says. That's what everything says. They should be pretty darn good, but they're not. They're not good. They're very bad. They've been very, very bad. And you have to look at the coaches. But Daryl Funk, that can't be a solution mid-year. That's a postseason solution. It has to be. So this offensive line, now they've got injuries. They're going to have to move some guys around again. They're going to have to find that right combination. They got to find it in a hurry because Kansas showed everybody what the blueprint is. And it's don't even pretend like BYU is going to rush the ball and get after Keaton Slovis. The last thing I want to talk about today, Keaton Slovis, he played well. He had a couple of interceptions. The second half wasn't great. He was doing it all on his own out there, man. I mean, he's like Zeus throwing lightning strikes in a war against the Titans when there's nobody else there helping him. The wide receivers, they did fine. Isaac Rex is fantastic. There's zero running game. He's throwing into, every time he gets the ball, he's throwing into a swarm of defenders trying to jump the routes, and he's looking at a heavy blitz because they're coming after him because everybody knows Keaton Slovis is going to drop back and throw the ball. Keaton Slovis is the only reason BYU was even close to in that game. Period. End of discussion. Anybody suggesting that Slovis is even part of the problem, that maybe BYU should look to Jake Retzlaff? No. Keaton Slovis is the only reason BYU is in games right now, and he's doing it on his own. That passing game is the only reason BYU had a chance, sort of, to win that game in Kansas. A lot of problems in Cougar Town right now. BYU's got to figure some stuff out. They got to figure it out in a hurry. It's a short week. They kick off against Cincinnati on Friday night. We're going to have a lot to say about it. Appreciate you tuning back into the Daily Dose and starting off a new week with us. And until next time, give them hell.